Welcome to the Special Parent Podcast. I'm Dr. Deanna Iverson, a proud mom of 3 boys and 2 incredible kids with special needs. I'm here to remind you that you're not alone on this journey. Whether you're navigating the highs, the lows, or those moments in between, this podcast is your weekly dose of hope, help, and heartfelt guidance. Together, we'll celebrate the victories, tackle the challenges, and connect with a community that truly understands. So grab your favorite cup of coffee or tea, settle in, and let's embark on this empowering journey together. You've got this. Welcome everyone to the Special Parent Podcast. I'm Dr. Deanna Iverson, and I'm very excited to have with me a guest today. This is Amy Lang, and Amy Lang is a parent, but most importantly, she's a sexuality educator, and she specializes in neurodivergent children. So Amy, thank you so much for joining me. Welcome.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me on. I'm excited to talk with you, and I always learn something from my people I'm working with on podcasts. So I'm excited to get to know you and share my info with your people.
Oh, and I'm really excited about this too. I can't wait to hear what you have to tell us. But first and foremost, how did you get started in this area, the sexuality education, specialization of neurodiversity? How did that get started for you?
Well, I had been a sex educator for throughout all my 20s and into my 30s, and I was doing the usual stuff, birth control, pregnancy counseling, STI counseling, loved it, and had assumed that I was going to be spectacular when I had a kid, and that nothing would faze me, and it would just be really easy, and I was really wrong. When Milo, he's 23 now, it was about 5, he was getting ready for a bath, and he grabbed his penis, and I thought he was going to tell me it felt good to touch it. And I was just like, don't tell me that. Please don't tell me that, in my head. And then anyway, so that was my moment where I thought, okay, this is not how this should be, and you need to figure it out. So I started doing a bunch of research to figure out how to talk with kids about sex. And then the other part of my background is I have a master's degree in applied behavioral science, and my focus was in adult education. So as I'm figuring this out for our family, I realized that I could help other adults. And so I started Birds and Bees and Kids. And as you can imagine, Milo was completely mortified by my work for his entire life. He's better now. So I've been working with neurotypical parents and neurodivergent parents all along. I'm not neurodivergent. Milo isn't. My spouse, Carrie, has dyslexia, which I did not know was neurodivergence. And when I learned that, I was like, oh, this explains so many things about you. And so in the last couple of years, when I do individual consultations, people would just drop in, oh, my kid is autistic, ADHD. And then I was like, okay, what's happening? So I started asking at the top, any neurodivergence in the family? And I kept getting yeses. Like I would say I'm guessing like 2/3.
That's a good number.
A lot. And I thought, okay, well, y'all seem to need some help. Let me see what I can find.
Right.
And I couldn't find anything for people who were parenting neurodivergent kids between from preschool to middle school, which is my sweet spot with neurotypical kids. So I was like, okay, I could do this. So I got a certification in neurodiversity and sexuality and disability, actually, from Mercy College. And so have been putting that to work and working with neurodivergent families, working with within schools that have neurodivergent kids. And I also work with professionals and do sexual abuse prevention training and teach about sexual behavior in children. So I have been able to add this on. And honestly, I was ready for something new. And it has been I just always feel good about helping parents, but helping parents with neurodivergent kids or kids who are disabled or with disabilities has just, frankly, it's just so much more rewarding because it's so important and they feel better, right? Like everybody feels better, but double feel better. So anyway, that's how I got my start. And here we are.
Yeah, here we are. Well, I'm so glad you were able to join me. And for me, as a parent of children that are neurodiverse, it's been such a roller coaster ride. And that's why when I was starting to research for myself, because I have boys, and I know it's not mostly boys, but it feels like it sometimes, that it's just, there's a lot more going on with boys in that sexuality piece a lot of times. And I just was trying to figure out how to help my kid. And it was really, really challenging because there's not a lot out there. And we've done some things, and then of course some things have completely flopped and failed. And so that's why when I ran across you, I was like, oh my gosh, this is amazing. And so like we talked about, special needs and the birds and the bees is a little bit different than just talking the birds and the bees in general. So I love the fact that we're going to have this conversation. So I want to tell you a little bit about why was I researching this? Why was I coming across this? So it was several years ago, but my son, when he was, and I don't remember if it's exactly around 8, but I want to say between 7 and 8, we had gotten them these tablets, and they were Amazon tablets, not anything against Amazon. I'm a proud Amazon purchaser.
Are we all?
We had gotten the Amazon tablets for kids, and they had Kids Tube. It's not YouTube, it's Kids Tube. And so it's supposed to be a little bit more protectant. In addition to that, we had added I think it was Bark is one of the ones that we had used, and we've used other ones, and we've put on all these checks and balances in places, and we'd look at our kids' tablets every once in a while, etc. So we thought we were good. And my kids are using their tablets. And my son is special needs in a lot of different areas, but he has a lower cognition level. So for him, just basic internet searches weren't happening because he can't really spell words yet or anything. So I think I also had a false sense of security that he also wouldn't discover sexual content because he didn't even know how to spell it, even if he could say it yet. And I learned my lesson. So what I found out was when we discovered that he had been exposed to pornography on his tablet with all the checks and balances in place, it was about 4 clicks, because you know how when you're on the tablet you can use the back button. It was 4 clicks backwards from the pornography to the kid's video he was watching. So it's clickbait on the side panel, clickbait.
Yeah, terrible.
And I was just shocked. I didn't think it was a possibility with all the stuff that we had put in place. And ever since that day, my son has an addiction to pornography.
So sorry.
We have fought this battle, and it's been years. We're 7 years fighting this battle. And he doesn't understand. As much as we've attempted to explain it and done all the things, he doesn't understand why this is not healthy for him. And I've tried so hard, and we've tried, we have not gone to shaming. We don't believe in that. Yes. My husband and I are not into shaming. This is not something to be ashamed of. I mean, heck, pornography is out there because it's used a lot. But it's not something to be ashamed about. However, he doesn't understand why he should even try to fight it. Right. And so that's part of, I would say that's the bigger part of the battle we're fighting with him, is why do I even need to fight this, is kind of his question. So I was researching, and I came upon you, and I can't wait to hear what you have to say.
Yeah. Oh man, I'm so sorry that happened to you. And I think that you're just like every other parent, right? You do all the things, and then you just can't imagine that kid's YouTube is not safe ever. In the end. It's
even
just
Kids Tube. It's not.
That's not. And, and so that happening is it's not a surprise to me. And, Bark and Custodio, they're not perfect.
Right.
And
they're good. It's a good start. It's just
better than nothing.
Right.
It's better than nothing. Right. Nothing is a much bigger problem, because you can get to way worse stuff than, maybe your kid initially saw. But yeah, and not shaming, because it's not their fault. Right? Even if they're seeking it out, it's not their fault that they're curious. It's not that their fault that their friends are talking about it. It's not their fault that their parents aren't talking with them about sex. Like, none of that's their fault. A whole lot of it is us. Not to be shaming. But.
Right. Exactly. And I honestly, this is one of my sons, and I didn't think he was ready cognitively to have too much of a conversation. He knew some basics. We'd said the word sex before. We talked about private parts. I mean, I think most everyone touches on that by the time they're 7, 8 years old, just because we're afraid of what's out there. We've talked about that kind of stuff, but I hadn't really gone into at all what pornography was or anything, because I did not expect him to need that conversation.
Of course not. Of course not. Especially that child of yours, right?
Right.
Who isn't operating on this, he's got stuff going on that doesn't put him in the same, he's not a typical 8-year-old, right? Or he wasn't a typical 9-year-old or 12-year-old. So that just makes things more complicated. But it doesn't mean that just because your child is neurodivergent and whatever that looks like, or developmentally different, it doesn't mean you don't talk with them about this part of life, because they are sexual beings. They will have sexual feelings. Pretty much everybody does. And sex and relationships is one of the biggest things we do in our lives. It's with us from birth until death.
Yeah. And it's supposed to be a rewarding part of our lives. I mean, it's intended to be the celebration dance.
It's supposed to be fun, right? And unfortunately, it's incredibly confusing. And right. And so, one of my philosophies is that our children have a human right to be prepared as they can be for this part of life. And that's on us.
Right.
It's on us, right? I mean, we don't do anything bigger than this or more complicated than this in our lives. The romantic relationships, sexual relationships, there really isn't anything much bigger. And that can have, it's physical, it's social, it's emotional, right?
It's all the parts.
It's all the things, right? Calculus is intellectual. I'm in the end. And then who uses calculus? I don't know what it is. Who uses calculus? I don't even know what it is. Trigonometry. Don't ask. But finding a way to make this a priority in our parenting can be hard because of our personal histories, because of the way our kids are wired, right? Because of our culture. Maybe you're someone who's in a religious culture where it's absolutely not allowed to talk about. There's so many places, but at the end of the day, this is about health and safety. And that is our only job, to keep our kids healthy and safe. So all that to say, one of my things is that this doesn't have to be so hard. It can be really fun and funny. I mean, there's just so many stories and the talking about it, even if your child doesn't quite get it, you still have to talk about it, because you're doing due diligence, right? You need to do everything you can to make sure your child is safe. So, or has this information. So I just want to put that out there. And then what are you thinking?
Well, I loved when you were talking about it, you said this is really one of our most important jobs, because it does have, it's all encompassing on who we are. It's that social, emotional, all those pieces. So as a parent, that can come across as pretty overwhelming. I'm supposed to not only discipline my child, make sure they, are behaved well when we go to the restaurant. I'm supposed to do all these other things. But above all of that, the health and safety and our sexual health is important to us as human beings. And so how do we help? What's the first steps? Let's just start with almost age group. Let's start with in the beginning. When they're young, how do we have the conversation with our younger kids, regardless, or taking into consideration the fact that maybe younger, it's more mental age than physical age. How do we have that conversation with them?
So the first conversation is using correct names for their private body parts.
I agree.
Right? I mean, penises, vulvas, vaginas, testicles, butts, anuses, mouths are also a private part. Just using, but the down there parts, using those correct words, what happens is that takes away the mystery. So when we say front bottom, back bottom, tallywhacker, tinkle waggle, my favorite, it's confusing. Right. And it also says there's something special or different down there. This is not my smeller, right?
Right.
It's my nose. And for, kids who are autistic and neurodivergent, you just got to be straight. They are
black and white.
Right? Black and white thinkers. They don't understand a euphemism. So if you say, hey, hey, how's your taco today? I'm just kind of, how's your taco? Is your taco itching? And you've got a person with a vulva, they're going to be like, itching taco, what the hell? Right? Or they're a middle schooler and and someone's talking about, that girl's taco. They're going to be like, vegetarian or ground beef, right? They're not going to catch the slang, right? And so that's the very, very first conversation, is using the correct names for private body parts. And The other reason for that is that it's protective, because folks who mess with kids, they want them to be clueless. So if your child says, like, Thanksgiving is coming up, right? If your child's at the dinner table and they're like, God, my penis itches, the whole room's going to freeze, right? Right. But if there is a person there who's a predator, they hear your kid say penis, they're going to be like, all right, someone's talking to that child.
Yep. That's
And
true.
yeah.
It does take a lot of that, like, it takes that away from it, and it makes it a conversation that's actually okay to have, which is part of it. Is the reason we're talking about it is we want our kids to talk back with us about it. And if we act like it's then they're going to run away and talk to their friends about it first.
Right. Right.
So, yeah.
The friends might be accurate. Like, we all had friends who were accurate, and then we all had friends who were not so accurate. So right, they're going to find the information. And like you just pointed out, they're going to find it online.
Yep.
Right.
They're going to find it online. And online doesn't use the terminology.
Oh, no, it's way worse.
Yeah.
It's way worse. So talking about that, talking about different kinds of families, talking about literally how babies are made, right? The penis goes usually, right? Penis goes in the vagina, always takes a sperm and an egg, and talking about how they came to be. And there's lots of really good books, which are, good for some kids, not so good for other kids. There's a great website called amaze.org that has videos on everything you can possibly think of. And they're kid friendly, they're cartoons. And so using, like, with neurodivergent kids, you need to use a lot of different techniques, right? A lot of different ways, like different learning styles, right? So making sure they understand that, and that this is a conversation you do have in your family, and you need to say, we can talk about anything you want. I will answer you honestly. Right? If you have questions, come to me. If you're curious about something, come to me. And then one of the biggest myths out there in the sex talking land is that if your child is ready to know, they'll ask. No. My child told me he'd rather talk to strangers than me or his dad. It was great. He also told me that he would never ask me a question.
No, so not on this topic, Mom.
I mean, really not on anything, actually. One of those tight-lipped human beings. So just remembering, like, this is your responsibility. And even if you are uncomfortable, that's okay. All you do is you say, I'm uncomfortable, right? Nobody talked to me about this. I'm going to be weird, right?
Right. And like you said, say I'm uncomfortable. Even if, I would even say as a parent, even if you say to your kid, like, okay, we do need to have this discussion, and Mom's a little uncomfortable because this is my first time having this discussion with you. And that, when kids know that we're more human emotionally, I think they accept and roll with that better too. That makes them more relaxed because, if Mom's uncomfortable, then it's okay that I'm uncomfortable.
Yeah. Exactly.
So I can be part of the discussion.
Yeah. Or just say, this is going to be weird for both of us. Here we go. You need to know, right?
You need to know. I like it.
You need to know. And, and some kids, depend on wiring and just personality, can be really uncomfortable with this. Lots of times neurodivergent kids really struggle with the changes of the body through puberty. Or just, the other piece too is, like, lots of kids are like this. They're like, I'm never doing that, so I don't need to have this information. Really common. And it's like, well, you say that now, which you can't really say because it's condescending, but it's like, yeah, I get it. But one of the things that often resonates with kids is if you say, you know what, it is really cool to be the smartest kid in your friend group about this. I like that, right?
They do.
They might not care. It doesn't resonate with every child, but they might not care. And for you as a parent, it is really cool to be the smartest parent in your friend group about this. It's great.
I remember a lot of times when I would, say to parents, oh yeah, we've talked to, so-and-so about it, one of our sons. And you have already? Oh yeah. And then especially after what happened with my middle son, I would say yes, because this happened. And I would have parents be like, oh, well, did you try this app or that app? That would have, and I'm like, no, you're not understanding what I'm saying. There is only a level of protection with all of this out there. So we have to have the conversation because that is the top level of protection.
Right.
Is the information.
Right.
So with kids that have like they're developmentally delayed, maybe they have like a lower cog issues going on. What would you say are some ways, obviously still use the right vocabulary and language. What would you say are some of the ways that we need to do? For example, maybe more frequent conversations, or like you mentioned that one website that's probably pretty helpful because it's done cartoon-like.
Yeah. So more frequent, shorter conversations.
Order too. Okay.
Really, I mean, again, one of the glories of what I've come to understand, especially with autistic folks, is you don't need to just say it. Like, you don't need to be careful. It doesn't serve anyone, including you. And it's so nice to just say, yeah, sometimes, sometimes people, like, I'm going to say things. So everybody get ready. Put your sturdy hat on.
Adult conversation.
I'm going to talk about oral sex. Like, you can say, like, hey, sometimes when they're doing sexual stuff together, they might put their mouths on each other's privates. It's called oral sex. It's something they agree to do. It's not for kids. It's for later in life.
Yep.
Rather than saying something like, oh, hey, I need to talk to you about something. And okay, there's this kind of sex. It's called oral sex. Do you know what that is?
That makes it like this again.
One person puts their mouth on another person's privates and then they duck, right? Right. And you hear me rattle that off, right? Like, how many times have I described oral sex? 7,000.
Right.
So the reason I want to give you that example is because it's highly charged and kids are talking about it. There's an epidemic of kids talking about 69 on the playground. Like, it's all over the place. And I was just actually in, where was I? Alabama, and teaching at an Air Force base with a group of folks who work with kids. And I was like, how many of you are hearing about the 69 on the playground? A third of the hands went up.
Wow.
How about the sexual moaning?
The other third are going to know real fast.
Right. The sexual moaning. That's the other thing that's going on. These sexual moaning sounds. And I'm like, how about that? And they're like, yeah. So there's this epidemic of this stuff going on. And so we have to get ahead of it because your kids need to understand that, yeah, this is something that people do. They agree to do it. It's later in life. It's not for kids. And with a child who's got lower cognition, one of the things that can happen is their body can be ahead of their brain, right?
Yeah,
so you could have a 13-year-old who's cognitively more like a 9 or 10-year-old. And here they are in their grown-up body. They're having sexual feelings. They're getting boners left, right, and center. They don't know what to do about that. And they might be more likely to touch themselves in public because they struggle with public-private. And so those kids absolutely need books and lots of conversation about what's happening with their body so they understand it's normal, right? And then talking about sex in a simpler way. But if you've got your 13-year-old who's cognitively like a 10-year-old hanging out with other 13-year-olds, right?
Yeah. And so that's the hard part, I think, is teenagers are exposed to it. Obviously, in junior high, kids are talking about it. I think some parents are in denial that it's happening in elementary school. Yeah. I really do. But it is. But then when you get a child who's a teenager, so they're in junior high or maybe freshman in high school, but they're a young teen. Developmentally, they're not a young teen. They're delayed. So maybe they're hanging out with, or they're around, or they consider friendships of kids that are younger. They're going to bring the older conversations across that spectrum. And it could be they make the moaning sounds to see what the other kids respond with, because they're trying to figure out, well, they laugh at it over here, or they're going to laugh at it over here. Right. And so they make the moaning sounds, or they make the gestures they've seen other kids do. And then the younger kids are like, what the heck was that? So it's better for parents if you have got that elementary school kid, if you start talking about it early, very matter of fact, just like you would math or anything else, then when what the heck is that happens, they're going to come to you because they're not afraid. They're not thinking it's a hush-hush topic. They're not those kinds of events. So it's really critical for all age groups to really be having that conversation because of that.
Yeah. And consistently, right? And consistently, like even like kids before puberty are often really fine. Like lots of them will just talk and be super chatty. And then they get into puberty and adolescence and they're like, I don't need to hear this. I already know everything. My personal favorite. And so they put the brakes on. And so just because your kid has put the brakes on, that doesn't mean you stop talking.
That's a good one.
You don't, like, just because they don't want to hear it doesn't mean you stop talking about it. Like, think of all the other things. Like, they need to bathe. You don't stop. Well, sometimes you just have to. Forget it. Your peers will take care of you smelling like a swamp The goats and farts is what was going on at my house.
That's true. A lot of times that will
You boys, right? Goats and farts, goats and farts. So you can't give up on this because they don't want to hear it. And again, your kids are more, they're more at risk. They're higher risk. They're unfortunately, right? And I wish I could say this was just going to fix all that, but it's not. And one of the places that kids kind of get into trouble are girls who are neurodivergent. They mask. Yeah. And they do much more going along to get along. They're diagnosed later. Women aren't diagnosed until they're in their 30s or 40s sometimes because we mask. We know how to go along and get along, right? And so we've got a 12-year-old girl who's operating on a 9-year-old level, and she's hanging out with other girls who are talking about crushing and all kinds of things. And she's going to maybe say some things that they're crushing things, and she doesn't understand what she's doing. So she might make herself vulnerable inadvertently. And so now that for those of you who have neurodivergent and developmentally different gals, just take a breath. Because this open line of communication is what's one of the things that can help them. So role playing and saying, if you don't understand something that's happened, just tell me, and being really clear. You won't be in trouble. Even if a kid tells you you'll be in trouble, you will not be in trouble. We don't roll that way. We don't.
Yeah. And I think that that's also, letting them know that there's that safe place, no matter what anyone else has told you.
Yeah.
And we keep referring to neurodivergent, which is a very large category, a little bit of a smaller category. However, when you and I were kind of discussing this before, you had mentioned the category is smaller, but the percentage of students affected within that category is a lot larger. And that's like your transgender category, your LGBTQ. So will you kind of explore that again for our listeners?
Absolutely.
It's a little bit different of a category than just neurodivergent, and I want to make sure that we give that the price.
It's related to sexuality, right? So about 2 to 3% of folks who are autistic identify as something other than cisgender and straight. So is LGBTQ. So cisgender means that when you were born, they looked at your parts and said you're a girl because you had a vulva, or you're a boy because you have a penis. And so that's what cisgender means. We all know what straight means, right? So it's really interesting, and that they're much more likely to be LGBTQ, and there doesn't appear to be a lot of research into why, but the kind of reasoning is that they don't give a crap about social norms, right? A lot of autistic people are like, I just am who I am. I don't care. I like that person. I don't feel like a girl. I feel like a boy. I feel like both. I feel like neither. Or I feel like I'm not I feel like I'm told I'm a girl, but I really do feel like I'm a boy, right? And so they have this different kind of worldview of gender and sexuality, which I think is honestly, I know this is probably controversial, I think it's probably more real. Right? It's more real because they're not falling, or they're not as subject to these social mores and our cultural stuff and that kind of thing, which depending on what family the child's in can be really awful, but for the child, and really hard on the parents, because lots of people don't understand this because we are cisgender. Like, I can't imagine being a boy, right? Or a guy. I
wouldn't know how that, there are times I say to my boys, because they'll ask me, we do have open conversations. They'll ask me questions about parts or itchings or this or that, which is totally normal questions for them to ask. And there are times that I go, well, I don't know, let me call your dad in.
I don't have your parts, and I'm not interested in having your parts. So just being very mindful that this is something a big proportion of neurodivergent folks deal with and kids deal with. And then here's another interesting statistic. Let me see if I can get it right. 6% of people who are transgender are autistic.
Wow, that's a much larger percentage.
Yeah. And I think it just comes back to that piece around, I don't see the world in the same way. Like, coming back to your stinky boys, right? Like, they don't care. I don't care that I stink. Like, the world around you cares. I don't care. You need to bathe. I don't care, right? Because that's really a social thing that they don't care about, which is gross, but there you go. Anyway, I'm not an expert on getting children to bathe.
Yeah, and it's, when we talk about these topics with children, even if your child is physically a girl, emotionally a girl, all the things, or a boy, they probably should have the discussion about what transgender is, what LGBTQ plus is, and start to understand that even early, because it will make them a better friend. It's going to make them not hoo-hoo if the topic comes up. So it's one of those things that's really, really important for our children to dive into. And I think that that's really something that it should be part of every conversation that we have.
Absolutely. And especially like that's a conversation when your kids are little about different kinds of families, right?
Right.
And different kinds of relationships. So it's everywhere. It is never going away. And so just your responsibility as a parent of a neurodivergent kid is to be just mindful. Okay, they might see this part of themselves differently than I do. And there's so much help and support for parents of queer kids. But one of the other statistics that I am going to just drop in here is that unfortunately, queer kids are 4 times more likely to commit suicide.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
That's a really important statistic because this can be one of the topics that...
And then you add neurodivergence, you add this, you add that, and it's going to increase that as well. But the one thing that keeps those kids on par with the general population is parental support. And it's really interesting because if the parental support just comes down a tiny bit, their suicide risk it's higher. It's crazy. So that for me is a big deal, right? Like nobody wants their kid to do that.
Right.
And
I think everybody would love to have a heads up. And if they know that right off the bat, this is something that's going to be critical to understand and a conversation to be having, then it's definitely, it's like, oh, you never want to look back as a parent and say, if I had only known.
Yeah. Or if I had believed my child.
Yes.
Right. And also it can be really confusing because adolescence is a time of trying things on and exploring. And so, if we have kids who lots of stories from parents who are like, okay, my daughter announced that they are non-binary, which means they don't have a gender and they are using they, them pronouns last week. And now she's furious. They are furious because I misgendered them. And so used she instead of they. And then a week later, they're back to she. And then they're back to they. So there's this exploration and stuff. And so trying to keep up with that. So my friend Joe Langford, who is a wonderful therapist who works with boys, and he says, just hold it lightly. Roll with it. Ask, what does that mean? And when you misgender them or you're super confused and they're making you nuts with this, you go do that with your friends. With them, you are loving kindness and light and trying to figure it out. Right? Be there for them, be supportive. And if you don't get it, you can just say, I just don't get this, but I love you. Right. And we'll figure it out.
Just like you can say, this is going to be an awkward conversation. You can say, this is not something I'm familiar with and understand from your perspective. But that doesn't mean that as your parent, I still love you. That doesn't mean that there's a lack of love or a lack of wanting to understand. I love you. I'm here for you. Let's figure out how we're going to walk this together.
Yeah.
And I mean, let's admit it, as they grow up, there's just times we conflict because they're teenagers. And so this is really, if we just relax and treat it as just another area we conflict in and we're going to navigate, I think we're going to navigate it a whole lot better than if we get ourselves emotional energy. So yeah, that makes a big difference. I think that's a key thing to focus on. Oh, go ahead.
Just circling back, this is not something people do intuitively. Well, parenting is not something people do intuitively. Let's just be clear about that. But this is really not something people do intuitively. So learning about how to talk with kids, understanding what they need to know by when, and realizing that they absolutely need to know. They should know how babies are made by the time they are 6. That needs to get out of the way. That is science. It's easy. Right? Yep. They should understand about different kinds of relationships. They should know about crushing and what love is. And they should know that people have sex for fun. Most of the time we're having sex for fun, right?
True.
Baby making, which you should also be very clear that we plan our pregnancies. Pregnancies are planned.
Yes.
Absolutely. Just plant that seed. If you're going to have sex, you're going to use birth control. If pregnancy can happen, just being really clear about that. And, if you're a person who believes that people should wait until they're married, until they have sex, and that does not work because you might have been that person. It doesn't work. It's never worked. It never will work. But you can say, what I hope for you is that you wait until you're in a loving, committed relationship, ideally married. But if isn't, if you're heading down that path, please let us know. We'll make sure you're safe and it's a good decision for you, right? Because you can't control them, but you can set them up for success.
Right. And like you said, you can tell them what your hope and your goals are.
Yeah.
That is so, that we do that in all parts of parenting. We tell them what our hopes and goals are for them and careers and everything. We should also tell them for our hopes and goals in their sexual life with a but. But
Right.
you're your own person. This is your life. So as you navigate that, come to me, let me help you. Know that pregnancies are planned.
Right.
And they're planned, which means we use birth control, which means if you're going to have sex, even if you are married versus not married, we need to be talking about how you're going to make sure that you don't end up with a baby you're not ready for and you don't want to have right now, because then that's a whole other slew of decisions we don't even need to be interjecting in this conversation.
Stop talking about that.
Right.
Yeah.
It's just so many times people don't want to talk about it at all. And so it's such an important part, is we have to have the birth control part of the conversation. Like you said, it starts with, by the time it's 6 that you said, they should know how sex happens.
Yeah. People agree to do it. It feels good to their grown-up bodies. It's not for kids. It's for later in life. We'll talk about it a lot so you feel ready for it if that's something you want to do.
Yeah.
And those harder conversations about rape and assault and that kind of stuff needs to come along. They should know. So like a 10, 11-year-old should know about those awful parts of sexuality, which I can't even call those sexuality, but those awful parts of life. They need to know about that because they're going to hear the words.
Yes.
And then if we kind of circle back to the porn conversation, the porn they're going to see is violent. It is fake. It is racist. It is sexist. It's awful.
It's awful.
It's awful.
Absolutely horrible. It destroys the image of what sex should be. It absolutely destroys it.
Absolutely. And kids think that they use that for training. They think that's how you do sex.
Because they don't have anyone to train them.
Right.
So that's why we want to have the conversation.
Yeah, right. So being really clear, like, if you have a crush on someone, you need to talk, find out if they are crushing back and talk about that. And then when people are engaged in any kind of romantic relationship, it usually starts with hand holding.
Yes.
Right. And there's lots of conversation. There's a progression, right? And porn starts in the middle, like being really clear, like porn starts in the middle. Real people don't do those things. Yeah. Nobody's body looks like that. They don't make those noises. The women are not enjoying that. They're acting, like being really clear that this is not real. And for your child who doesn't get it, all he gets is that it feels good to watch it.
Right.
Doesn't get anything else.
Doesn't get anything else. And it's hard to explain. Like I said, I have 3 boys. One of ours is older, and we actually took him to, and oh my gosh, I blanked on the name of the movie that came out, but it was about sex trafficking. And that was part of obviously we'd had many more conversations before we just dropped him into that movie.
Right, we were into the movies.
Right. But it hit him in such an emotional and impactful way. And then at the end of that movie, when we were having our discussion, when Dad and I were sitting down with him and discussing what it was, part of what we brought up is this is what the porn industry is. So, and he, again, much more mature level, we said, if you were to watch porn, you're promoting that industry. And oh my gosh, that hit home with him in a whole new level. And so there was a lot leading up to that. Again, this was when he was older. But I do think that if you're laying the foundations, then yes, you can get kids to start to understand the deeper levels of things.
Yeah, for sure. And that, he's older, so he could have some empathy, right?
Yeah.
So young kids don't have empathy. They just don't. They don't have empathy until they're like 10 or maybe if they had that. So when he could see that, oh my God, he could see the through line, right? He could see the through line. And so with neurodivergent kids, the other thing that happens is that there's this idea, and developmentally different kiddos, that they're not sexual.
Right.
They're just not interested. They're not capable.
And
they're not interested, which is easy for us.
Okay.
Right? Yeah. Oh, don't need to know. If you're not interested, you're not capable of having a romance. So that's just absolutely not true. And it's just going to look different. It's just going to look different. So assuming your child has the same urges, interests, instincts, all of that as every other human being is really important because it's respectful. It's respectful. And, lots of times people also think that if you fill a kid in about sex, they're going to go out and try it.
No.
That's generally speaking not true.
Right.
Having the information.
Starting as early as you're talking about, by 6, they should know what sex is, and then you're building on it. They're not going to go out and try it because to them, it's just a normal part of conversation. We talk about college, we talk about family, we talk about sex, we talk, it's just part of the evolution of growing up in conversations. And so, they're not just going to go run out there and try it because you've talked about it.
Exactly. Because they're going to do it anyway.
So here's an important question. We've talked about how do we start? We've talked about being 6 years old. What about my guests who have a 16-year-old or a 13-year-old and they're going, we haven't had the conversation, now what?
Okay, here's the good news. With the person who is 12 and over, you do not need to be careful. You don't need to say when a man and a woman fall in love, none of that. You just say to them, the first thing you say is, we've blown it. I blew it. We should have been talking to you about this. We didn't know what to say. We didn't think you were ready. Frankly, we weren't ready. I wasn't ready. But you have to know, because there is so much bad information about this that I know you've heard. Even if you think your child's in a bubble, maybe they are. I mean, maybe you live in a log cabin in the middle of Montana with no Wi-Fi and they're homeschooled. But I'm going to guess no. Like you say, I know you've heard stuff and it's time for us to start talking. I'm going to be uncomfortable. You're going to be uncomfortable. We will live.
Yep.
I'm going to get you books. We've got this great videos that can show you. And we have to talk about this because you need to be smart about it and then throw that whole thing about, you're the smartest person in your friend group. Feels really good. Feels really good. And they may say, I already know everything. And you say, great, I'm sure you know a ton, but I don't know what you know. So I'm going to be telling you stuff.
That's a great answer.
Yeah. And the nuts and bolts stuff, like the sciencey stuff around STIs and pregnancy and that kind of thing, as you recall, that's just kind of book learning, right? Yeah. But it's the pieces that are confusing about the relationship stuff. I mean, just reflect on your own high school years, right?
Yep.
Remember how confusing that was?
Oh, yeah. I'm glad.
And then layer neurodivergence on that, right? Layer some kind of intellectual disability on that, layer physical disability on that, layer in, and it's just even more complex. But I'm just going to go back to this idea that you being just straight and not pussyfooting around, just talking about it is easier and better for everyone. And no one's going to die and no one's going to throw up. So there's that.
Well, and I love, like you said, there's so many resources out there. And so we'll put some of the resources on my website. And of course, I'll link to your information too. One of the things that I love that you've said over and over again is you've said, this is for adults. So we're going to talk about it to prepare you. This is for people who agree. And you've used the word agree every time. And I like that. Agree to do this. Agree implies a discussion. That we're not accidentally letting this happen. We've discussed it. We're preparing for it. We're planning for it. And we're planning what we don't want to have happen, which is a pregnancy right now.
Any number of things.
Right. So those are the things I think you've loved about. And then also I love that you've said, be consistent. Don't give up the conversation. Start it as early as you can. And just keep going, keep going, keep going. Even when they push you back, just say, oh, that's okay. I understand that you don't want to talk about it right now, but I'm going to talk to you a little bit about it anyways, because I want to make sure we're still on the same page or that, we're still headed in the right direction. And then one of the things I love is you talk about it so naturally. Well, it's because you have a lot of practice.
I do.
So would you suggest that parents maybe practice a little bit in the mirror, getting comfortable with their facial expressions so they're not going, so there's this sex thing,
Yeah.
Would you suggest they practice in the mirror or even practice with each other if they can, or a best friend themselves?
Yeah. If you're parenting with someone, practicing in the car by yourself, if you're ever in the car by yourself, great place to practice. I have a book called Sex Talks with Tweens that's just scripts. I actually have a person who's a grandmother, and her grandsons come over. She just opens it up and reads it to them.
There you go.
Like she reads my scripts. It's okay. It doesn't matter. They're going to think you're weird anyway. So like, if you just say, I have notes because I'm uncomfortable, you're also modeling how you manage something when you feel uncomfortable, right?
Yeah.
So take notes. The other thing too is if you say something and you're talking and you're using too many words, or you get all hot and weird, or your kid like runs screaming from you, that's all fine. You're just going to come back and say, I need to do that again. I got all hot and weird and you ran screaming. So use your timer. I'm going to set your timer if they have a phone, which they should not have a phone until they are in the 8th or 9th grade. Set their timer and give me 3 minutes, and you use your 3 minutes. You can also say things like, you do not need to respond to me. I don't have any expectation that you ask me questions, but no matter what, when you're done, you say anything. What do you think? Did you already know that? Anything to add? You give them an opportunity to talk to you. You don't just like, I'm done. You always give them a space to talk to you.
I'm done, bye. Yeah, exactly. I love that. There's no expectation of response, but there's an opportunity for a response.
Yes, exactly. Exactly.
I love it. And then I'm going to feature your book on my website, of course. One of the other books that I brought up to you that my husband and I have used because of the porn situation is we use the good pictures, bad pictures. And we've read through this more than once with our kids. Even my children who have not been exposed to pornography, we've still read through this book with them.
Always.
So there are so many resources out there, and I think sometimes parents just don't know where to look. So obviously I'm going to list some, I'll link to you, you're going to list some, and then that'll give them at least a good launching point.
Yeah. And Good Pictures, Bad Pictures is the only book that's really good that's out there for kids about porn exposure. There's a junior version and I call it the senior version. So there's one for younger kids and there's one for older kids. It's good information for you too. And don't be afraid to read it. Don't be afraid to read it. Like you personally might need to chunk it down, and that's fine, especially with a child with a short attention span. So just be mindful. Like you might even only get like 2 paragraphs in. That's fine. I mean, with any of the books and things that we recommend. But the biggest thing here is that you're going to do what you can do, and doing nothing it's not okay.
Yeah.
So
it's setting them up for failure is what it's doing.
Yeah. And more complication and et cetera. So just for yourself, just to get, you've just already started the party. You listen to us. You listen to this conversation, right? So yay, one step done. So maybe the next step is to sign up for my newsletter or to go get a book that we recommend, right? Or to talk with your partner. If you're parenting with someone, like listen to this together, or just say, hey, we got to do this. What's our plan?
Right.
What's our plan?
Right. And I know there's a series of books, and if listeners are Christian, there's a series of books called God's Design for Sex. And it's a series because it literally starts off at ages 4, 5, 6. And each book is for a different chunk level. And they do exactly what you're saying, matter-of-fact terms. They go over exactly how things happen, and then they slowly introduce topics. Yeah. And then even if your family doesn't 100% agree on what the book is saying, what they can be doing is using that as, like you said, you read the book first, go through it. Yeah. Okay, at least I know what I need to be talking about at this age group with my children, and now I'm going to insert our own values into the system. Right.
So one thing about those books, I don't know how old they are, and the chunking it out is great, but just rule of thumb for 2024 is they need to know basically everything by the time they start middle school.
That's a scary thought, isn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, middle school seems so young, but you're right, because I was a middle school educator for 14 years and kids were having sex in the bathroom.
Yeah, they sure were. And they still are. And now they're doing worse
stuff.
Know
it all by middle school, which means that 11 to 12 years old, they need to know everything. And that includes opening the discussion of what is LGBTQ, what is transgender. All of that has to be known. So if your child is 6, 7, 8 years old and they're scared by the topic, you got to start digging in fast because you don't have much time left.
I mean, and the thing to remember is that if you get in, the sooner you get in the door and establish yourself as a trustworthy, knowledgeable person, you have age-appropriate resources for them, you're talking openly about it, it protects them. And it also puts you in this pretty cool position where you can be that parent that their friends know they can talk to if something goes sideways.
Yeah.
right? Which is a real position of honor. And so by being open with your child, by being, really, frankly, progressive with this and really on it, you could help another child.
That's
And
so wonderful.
yeah, it's a really great space to be in. And everybody likes to feel like an expert, right?
Yeah. And like you said, even if your child becomes an expert in the area, they might actually be helping in a way they don't even realize,
Right.
because they're comfortable with a conversation that other people aren't comfortable with.
Right.
So
Right.
consistent talk that is age appropriate. However, by 6, they should know what sex is and the mechanics of it. By 11, 12, which is double that age, 5, 6 years later, they should know it all.
The basics of everything.
They
The
should
basics of
understand.
everything. Yeah.
Yeah.
So the book that I really love that is kind of everything is called It's Perfectly Normal. And they should have that book. And it's going to feel like a lot. But compared to what they're going to be exposed to, as you know, it's not. It's healthy, it's accurate, and it's positive. Like when people hear the phrase sex positive, they think that that's like advocating for people being, S&M and swinging through the rafters and polyamory and all that. Sure, that's part of it. But really what it means is that we're kind of where you started. Like sex is a positive, healthy, wonderful, cool part of life.
Yep. And we just need to let our kids know that it is a part of an adult life for adults that agree whatever is going to happen and are prepared for it. And we talk about it just like we do anything else, their education, their future job, their friendships, everything else, because it is the whole human.
Absolutely.
So,
Absolutely.
Well, Amy, I really hope that, I bet we're going to get a lot of comments and a lot of questions. And I really hope that maybe we can schedule to have you back sometime in the future to kind of address some of those, maybe even take some of those questions and just specifically go at it, because I've loved this conversation. I really appreciate you joining us today.
Thank you. And thank you for trusting me with your people. I really appreciate it.
Oh, I'm so excited. I mean, I just have goosebumps from it because I know how much it's going to help so many people out there.
Good. Thank you. Me too.
Well, thank you, Amy. Have a good day.
You too.
This program is made possible by friends and partners of the Special Parent Podcast. For more information and to join our mailing list, visit specialparent.org.